Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, and today we are doing 3 segments. Once again, we are going to pick up on where we previously talked about and talk about the Bucks firing their head coach. If you saw the short that I did, I mentioned how the Bucks recently fired their head coach, even though that they were playing some winning basketball. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we are going to talk about the recent Lakers game and the recent Clippers game where Kawhi Leonard drops a triple-double, and along with some of the other games that went on. And then in our third segment, we are going to talk about the matchups of the week. And you could also come and stick around for our fourth segment, where I will not reveal it just yet, but later on in the stream, I will go ahead and reveal what it is. So stick around for that. I ask that you remember to follow and subscribe to the show if you like it. If you want to become a member or part of the show, there is a link in the description. And as always, as I do in every show, I like to remind you guys to please remember to tip and to donate to get your comments recognized. The link is on display on the ticker at the bottom of the show segment, and it will be in the description link. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, you guys, the viewers. It's definitely, once again, the link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and get into the first segment, which will be about the Milwaukee Bucks head coach recently getting fired, and Doc Rivers becoming the new head coach to fill in the position of the head coaching role for the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks, as I've mentioned several times before, they're the second-seeded team in the East. One of the teams to beat in the Eastern Conference. You definitely cannot go far without making sure that you topple those guys and beat those guys. Firing their head coach at this point in the season with how they've been playing was a little bit surprising, but it definitely shows that the Bucks' record is positive right now, and it's very, very positive compared to everybody else in the East. They're way ahead of the pack in terms of win percentage, and the only other teams that are competing against them are the 76ers and the Boston Celtics. There are several sources saying that he was fired because he made some really bad comments about Giannis, wanting him to get cut and not thinking that he's worthy of a roster spot. Not thinking that he's worthy of a roster spot on the Bucks. Now, if you want to keep Giannis Antetokounmpo, you need to make sure that you keep his family happy as well. So, if you're out insulting his brother, he is not going to take that lightly whatsoever. Giannis's brother is a fan favorite, so not only that, but he's Giannis's brother. If you don't keep his brother happy, then you don't keep Giannis happy. And if you don't keep Giannis happy, then you're asking for a lot of problems going into the season and going into your job. Not to mention, you are his coach. And saying things to other people like him not deserving the roster spot is just disrespectful. Because you're his coach. You are supposed to be the player to make him better. So if you're not doing that, and you're just out here throwing his name out and saying like he's some sort of scrub, that's just an insult to your job. And there's no need for him to do that. Sources have also said that he lost the locker room a while ago. So it's impressive to me that the team was able to keep their head up and continue being a top 2 team and being this very explosive basketball team that they really are. Even with like all of the locker room problems that they were having, and with all the problems that they had with their coach, they've still maintained their composure and they've still been able to focus on the rest of the season, which is honestly like the more impressive part in my personal opinion, because it's very difficult to play basketball against all of these teams, be a top 2 team, and be competing without having a proper coach and without having the right pieces to the puzzle, I guess you could say. So Doc Rivers, as I mentioned before, he is going to be the head coach that finally takes this coaching spot and replaces the guy who they fired. I don't like this move personally, but that's also because I'm not a big fan of Doc Rivers or his coaching, especially come playoff time. I personally think that the coaching from Doc Rivers in the playoffs gets very stale and very basic. Nothing he does is different from what he does in the regular season, which is a big problem when you are in the playoffs, because most teams usually try to adapt to what you do on the offense. They try to force their defense to make it so that way you cannot do the things that you normally would do on offense in the regular season. Not only that, but he is also responsible for blowing the most 3-1 leads in NBA history and the most leads in playoff history. That would be any lead. 2-0, 3-2, all those type of leads he has blown. Every single time he's been fired or he's lost his job, the team has ended up, it's mainly because the team has ended up coming short of the postseason, and that's how he's lost a majority of his jobs. He recently lost his job with the Clippers because they couldn't make it far in the postseason, or as far as they believed that they should have. Then he also lost his job with the Philadelphia 76ers because they also came up short when they believed that they should have made it a lot farther in the postseason. But what else can you do when Doc Rivers is your head coach? Which is why, in my personal opinion, I don't see this as a good move by them. I'm afraid that this exact same pattern of always ending up coming short in the postseason is going to continue to repeat itself every single time. And I feel like this is going to happen with the Bucks. Now, even though they are a strong team and their coach wasn't popular in the locker room before, they've shown that they don't necessarily need a strong coach in order to be a solid team. However, come playoffs, I believe that is going to hinder them a lot when they go up against teams that do have a coach that can make these adjustments. I think this might hold the team back now, in terms of substitutions and in adjustments, as I mentioned before. So having a coach that hinders all of that, then again, maybe it might be an upgrade, and I might only just be looking at the negatives because it is Doc Rivers, but he did lose the locker room, so there might be a possibility that he did not have the right adjustments down anyway, the head coach for the Milwaukee Bucks. So Doc Rivers is the only coach I can see messing up any lead in the playoffs, however. And this honestly might be what Joel Embiid needs in order to make it past the second round. He needs to match up against the Bucks and just hope to God that Doc Rivers finds a way to mess this up. He's done it several times before, and I understand like changes that like need to be made. Having a coach that doesn't have the locker room on their side is already bad news. The change needed to happen, but I wish they got a different coach for the job. It wasn't a bad pick, obviously. Like, he'll get you to the second round. It's just past that is like the bigger question, in my opinion. And he's had that reputation of struggling, and it's not healthy having that as like your culture now behind your head coach, being notorious for struggling in the second round. When he left the Clippers, they got farther without him. When he was with the 76ers, they continued to blow leads. His coaching mainly comes from how good his players can play while they're in the postseason. So that's like it's very iffy with some of these players because like you have to like rely on their consistency, and when they're not consistent, it's like, shoot, what do you do now? I personally don't think this brings much of a benefit to a team that's already been winning. I feel like maybe they should have stuck it out with their head coach until maybe the All-Star break, but I guess the change needed to happen now. Even with their new head coach, this is a great team, second in the East right now. They might need to worry about the Sixers coming up. They already have to worry about the Celtics, but the Sixers right now, seeing as they have a lot better chemistry with their coach and the roster that they have, I think might be a much bigger threat than the Milwaukee Bucks, assuming that the coaching and adjustments takes a minute to get settled in, because if we remember with what happened with the Clippers, James Harden came in, everyone thought that they were going to perform immediately. They played 5 games, and in those 5 games, they lost in embarrassing fashion, and a lot of teams immediately already wrote them off. But afterwards, and after those 6 games, they ended up winning a bunch of those games, a bunch of the rest of the games, including the one that I'm going to talk about in the next segment, but more on that later. It isn't All-Star break yet, so there's no need for the Bucks to panic. Like I said before, even with the problems in the locker room, it didn't really seem to affect them at all too much, so having a coach that doesn't give you those problems is always a boost. They're still winning these games that they needed to win, while some of them might have been closer than what they needed to be or what like you expect from this Bucks team. It's still a win, so it's totally fine, especially with the standings. In fact, let's go ahead and talk about the Eastern Conference and the standings. The only team right now that stays a major threat is Boston and Philly. Cleveland and the Knicks are in the 4th and the 5th seed, but they're more like second round teams. They might go against each other in the first round, so it's inevitable that one of them makes it to the second round. But if they don't match up against each other, I could see both of them making it to the second round. I don't see them beating either of the top teams in the East, but I see them losing to any of the seeds that are below them or winning. It's either or. The Knicks recently beat Brooklyn in a close game. Brooklyn was the home team. Their trade with OG to bring him onto the squad after trading for him from the Raptors was definitely paying off on the defensive end, but I still don't think that it'll be enough for the top teams in the East. And not to mention, actually, you know what? I'll talk about that game a little bit later in my second segment. I'm not on the hype on the Pacers and Tyrese. They're a great team offensively, but the team on defense really scares me simply because like they don't necessarily have that strength on defense. Their firepower is their offense. So if their offense isn't delivering, then chances are they're not going to have a good night. But that's the only thing that scares me about the Pacers. That's very important in the playoffs, having a very consistent defense. It's something a lot of the top dog teams in the East actually have already. They have two-way players, they have a great offense, and they also have a great defense. It's pretty scary to think how you could be winning and all of a sudden they still fire you with the Bucks head coach. So a lot of these coaches should probably watch out. Shows that there's much more to being a head coach than just winning games, which begs the question why Darvin Ham is still the head coach. He's been a lot of the Lakers' scapegoats and the reasons why they've been taking a lot of these losses. Only leading the Lakers to the in-season tournament finals is not enough for this team. They need to be ready for the postseason because you have to salvage the most of what you can with LeBron. And speaking of the Lakers, we've run out of time for this first segment, but we are going to go into the second segment where we talk about the Clippers and how they recently beat the Lakers in a very close game. Well, the scoreboard shows that it wasn't necessarily a close game, but it ended up being a pretty nice game, especially for Kawhi Leonard, and we're going to go ahead and talk about that in the next segment, and I'm going to acknowledge the comments in the next segment as well, so I will be right back. And we are back to the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Before I begin this segment, as I do with every single stream, once again, please remember to tip and donate. The link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. The link is also displayed in the ticker below. Makes the show a lot more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Once again, the link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And without further ado, let us go ahead and go into the second segment, which will be focusing on the two Los Angeles teams, particularly the Los Angeles Clippers and their win over the Los Angeles Lakers. And I will also take the time to acknowledge the comments. Crucial PG in the chat said Glenn Rivers hops his way in the league again. So I believe he is surprised about Doc Rivers taking the head coaching position, finally making his way into the league again. Question, do you think he is going to blow a lead? Let's find out. But that is a question for you, Crucial PG. Now, Fern PG, he's also in this chat. A lot of PGs in this chat. Take off the turtleneck. No, I can't take off the turtleneck. That is not what's going to happen. But anyways, the Clippers are, they recently came up with a win going against the Los Angeles Lakers. The score was 127-116. Good overall team win. So far, they've been stomping out all the opponents that they've been going against. With Harden being traded and Westbrook deciding to move over to the bench, it only made sense that they'd end up working things out towards the end. And the Lakers fell short behind Anthony Davis's 26-12 and D'Angelo Russell's 27-10. So far, it's looking like trading D'Lo isn't going to be the best move because of how well D'Lo has been playing recently in these last few games. Now, this could all change come playoff time, like how it usually does for LeBron and company, but I'm not sure if now, he's making a very legitimate statement and a very legitimate case to not trade him. So I feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place for trading D'Angelo Russell. Fern PG in the chat mentioned how Kawhi Leonard got his second career triple-double. Yes, I'm going to talk about that a little bit now. You know what? I might as well talk about now. So, yeah, Kawhi recently, in the last game that he won, he got his second career triple-double, and it's very surprising that that's only the second time that that's happened in his career. However, personally, I don't really see Kawhi Leonard going after assists. He mainly goes for, points and, rebounds. And when he was on the Spurs, he was obviously getting a lot more defensive stops than he was scoring on offense. So that was a much bigger priority to him than that. So because he doesn't have that playmaking aspect of his game, but he is a playmaker, he just doesn't necessarily do it as well as the rest of the small forwards at his position. But he has playmaking in his arsenal. However, since he doesn't get those assists, he can never really get a triple-double. So, but yes, that is his second career triple-double, and it was obviously a very impressive night for him and the Clippers, and a very good shooting night from him, going 11 from 16 from the field, even though he didn't hit a three-pointer. Russell Westbrook, also a key player to the offense, coming off the bench, making sure that the bench doesn't lose its firepower on the offensive side of the ball. He's been very productive. And these Clippers have been making a case for being one of the favorites to make it out of the West. Fern PG in the chat mentioned, or he has a question, who do I have all time, Giannis or Jokic? I think right now Giannis is better than Jokic all time simply because of the Defensive Player of the Year awards. Jokic has the better offense, but Giannis also is able to match in awards while also peaking him in awards. So I think Giannis might deserve having the higher all-time spot than Jokic does. Now, back on to what I was talking about with the Clippers. Russell Westbrook has been very productive on the Clippers and making a case for being one of the best teams to make it out of the Western Conference. And I believe that with Kawhi Leonard playing like this and the rest of the team being this productive on offense, James Harden having 23 points, Paul George having 17 on 8 of 12, Terrence Mann also having 17, along with Norman Powell also being able to score 17 points. This is a great all-around team. I believe that they could make a bunch of noise in the postseason. As for the Lakers, they really, really need to make this adjustment. They really need to get a good trade going. They really need to fix a lot of the pieces on this team, because they can't constantly be losing to these high-powered, high-seeded teams and expect to compete in the playoffs. That just can't happen. So I feel like they need to hurry up and get a trade going if they want to have a chance of making any type of further noise in the postseason. In further news, the Blazers lost once again to the Thunder. This time it wasn't in a blowout. They lost 109 to 111. I will go further into this game a little bit later. But for now, Shai dropped 33 points, which is almost a given for him on most of these nights. And he was also able to notch 10 assists. Shai has proven himself as a top 2 point guard in this league. The Warriors are done this season, in my opinion. So because they're done, I don't think Curry deserves to be top 2 in point guards. So for me, top 2 is between Luka and Shai. So I believe that right now, those two are the best point guards in the league. And this game is definitely an extension and more proof that Shai is one of those good point guards. Denver also beat the Indiana Pacers recently in a close game, 114 to 109. Nikola had another triple-double, getting 31 points with 10 assists, 13 rebounds, along with Jamal Murray also notching 31 points. So they both matched in points, and they were both able to pull away with the win over the Pacers. The Pacers did not have Tyrese Halliburton, however, and they still made it a close game. The final score was 114 to 109. So with that in mind, the fact that they didn't have their star point guard to provide offensively is very impressive. And if they had Tyrese, they most likely would have won this game, given with how close the scoring actually was. It wouldn't surprise me either if the Pacers pulled off this upset, because they've done it multiple times against several other teams. And Fern PG mentioned before in the chat, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Pacers beat the Bucks several times, even with Giannis scoring 64 points. And as mentioned earlier, the Nets lost 108 to 103 to the New York Knicks. Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson each scored 30 points. Mikal Bridges had 36, but it wasn't enough to go up against the Knicks. Mikal Bridges also received boos from his home crowd. He was later seen in the press conference making quotes saying, "It doesn't feel nice." It felt like playing at an away game, even though the Nets were essentially a home team. However, that might have been because of the locations of where the stadiums are and the fans that tend to go to these games, more so than it does the actual Nets fans booing you. So that doesn't necessarily sound like it makes sense, but let me make it so that it makes sense. So the Nets play in New York, same with the Knicks. And in the area that they play, there's still a wide variety of Knicks fans. So just because you live in Brooklyn doesn't necessarily mean you are a Brooklyn Nets fan. Most of the time, a lot of the people that are from Brooklyn have lived long enough to see the Knicks be the only team in New York, because the Nets used to be the New Jersey Nets. So before that, before there was even another team in New York, there was only the New York Knicks. So a lot of people hold a lot more loyalty to the Knicks. So all of that booing might have actually come from Knicks fans rather than it was coming from Nets fans. I went to a Knicks game and a Nets game where the Nets were the home team, but there was a lot of Knicks fans in the stadium, and they were chanting a lot of Knicks chants, even though the home field was the Nets. So because of like where the games are and how close they are to each other, that's the reason why he was getting boos from what felt like his home crowd, but it probably wasn't even his home crowd. Once again, in more news, the Pelicans beat the Utah Jazz behind CJ's 33 points. The final score was 153 to 124, a much higher scoring game. Zion ended with 17 and 11. Brandon Ingram ended with 18. Herbert Jones also ended up on the scoreboard too, being high up with 22 points. The Pelicans right now hold the 5th seed in the West, which is crazy considering their team is a little bit injury prone, and the fact that they've been able to keep up with that is really impressive. CJ is also great for the playoffs. He's great playoff material, I personally think, and I'm also a big fan of Zion. They could definitely make some noise. A lot of teams in the West can make noise in the playoffs. If the playoffs begin today, however, they face against the Clippers, which shows just how close the seedings are in the Western Conference. Before, in my previous live stream, you could see that I mentioned before how the Mavericks would be going against the Clippers if the playoffs were to start today. Now that matchup has completely changed, and it's honestly very crazy how quickly those matchups change. And Utah, before, which wasn't really in a play-in spot, now holds a play-in spot, which again shows how quickly like the seedings and like the rankings they quickly change, and they go in your favor depending on if a team loses at the wrong time, which is something that everyone needs to be looking at going later into the season, assuming everyone maintains a similar record. The Pelicans are another example of a mid-tier team, however, in my opinion, because of how good the West is. I think with the right matchups, they could either make a deep playoff run, but they could also go out in a playoff series very quickly with the wrong matchups. So that's something that definitely needs to be paid attention to when looking at the Pelicans going further into the postseason. So with that, we are out of time for the second segment, so after this short break, we are going to go into the third segment where we talk about the matchups of the week, so stay tuned for that.
Latest podcasts available anywhere. Go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And welcome back to the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, where we are going to talk about the matchups coming up this week. Now, there's so many different matchups that are still yet to be played coming up for this week. And I'm going to be talking about the big ones. One of the big nights that's going to be happening tonight actually is going to be the Phoenix Suns going against the Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, Kyrie and Kevin Durant, they both used to play on the same team at one point, so there's obviously beef between those two players there with their time on Brooklyn. Not to mention how Luka Doncic always has his best performances against Phoenix. If you remember a few years ago, 2 years ago, to be more precise, the Suns got embarrassed at home, and Luka Doncic was the main reason for that. It was a really bad loss for the Suns because they were the favorites to win that series. Obviously, the matchup of having those two go against each other is just going to be great. Those two being Luka Doncic and Devin Booker. They always have good matchups against each other, and I believe adding Kyrie and Kevin Durant into that mix with that matchup, it's just great offense all around. And you could even might even get some Bradley Beal action. You never know. But the main focus is going to be on those two, primarily. Now, that was obviously a really bad loss for the Suns 2 years ago. The matchup of having those two go against each other, it's going to be great. I personally think the Suns are going to come out on top in this matchup. It could go either way, though. Luka, he likes to go off. He's a different animal when he goes against Phoenix. So he might just prove me wrong. But I wouldn't be surprised if Phoenix ends up coming out on top simply because of how great their offensive firepower actually is. We also have a very anticipated matchup at the center position going in later tonight. That is Victor Wembanyama going against Chet in a very intense battle for Rookie of the Year. They're both top 2 in Rookie of the Year candidate. So there's a lot of anticipation going into this matchup. Chet is coming off of back-to-backs where he didn't particularly play well in this one win, but he didn't really have to since his team is really good and can end up winning these games without him, which is the biggest difference between him and Victor, in my opinion. Not to mention efficiency. It's like I said before in my previous episode, Victor deserves to win Rookie of the Year, and he might not prove it in the wins category, but he should be able to prove it in the total stats category. I think Wemby is going to outplay Chet in this game, not to a ridiculous degree like how it was last night, where even with Wemby scoring 33, Joel Embiid scored 70. I don't think it's going to end up being like that, but I do think that it is going to be a battle. They're both going to have a good night. I believe Victor is going to be the one that ends up out-dueling him. However, I believe that the Thunder are going to be the team that ends up coming on top. The Spurs are not a good team. As sad as it is to say, Victor Wembanyama does not have a great cast, so I do not believe they are going to be able to come up with a win against this high-powered team. The Celtics also go up against the rest of the matchups that are happening. They're against like low-seeded teams. They don't necessarily affect the brackets or anything. So tomorrow, the Boston Celtics go up against the Miami Heat at 7:30. I personally think this is a game to watch out for. This matchup will show if the Heat have what it takes now. I don't know if Terry Rozier is eligible to play in this game, but if he is, we will see if they become a much better team offensively with him on the roster. The matchup will show that if the Heat have what it takes to compete with one of the top teams in the East right now, especially since this was a team that beat them in order to make the finals in the last year. So it's a very good matchup, very highly anticipated. If Jimmy Butler plays this game, and Jason Tatum, I'm assuming, is definitely going to play this game, I think they will both put on a great show. They'll have a great game, and they'll go at each other blow for blow. It doesn't determine seeding because of how high the Boston Celtics are, but if they end up meeting them in the postseason, then it could definitely be bad news for Boston if they end up losing in these regular season games, because a lot of these regular season games, they give us like a story of what we need to expect going into the playoffs sometimes, especially the ones going late into the season. Those are the real playoff games. Like these ones, wait till the regular season like really picks up after All-Star break. Now, in some of the other matchups, Joel Embiid was just coming off of his 70-point game, going against the Pacers and he will once again go against the Indiana Pacers. Actually, no, pardon me. Excuse me for that. He just came off a 70-point game, and he is set to play the Indiana Pacers. Excuse me for that. He is set to play them tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And the Pacers have been going against really good teams, and they've also beaten a lot of really good teams. They beat the Bucks several times, as I mentioned previously. If Tyrese plays, I don't know if he'll play, but I'm not entirely sure if that'll be enough to stopping Joel Embiid and the Sixers. Now, like I said, they've been a high-powered offense so far, so anything can happen if they're able to hit their shots. But I don't think anything is stopping Joel Embiid right now. I don't see any rim protectors doing that in the league, and I don't see Miles Turner doing that. Embiid will not be held to under 30 points in that game, and the Pacers don't necessarily have the best defense, especially not at that position. So with that in mind, I don't think that Joel Embiid is going to lose in this game. Crucial PG mentions in the chat, love his game. Me personally, I don't like his game. Me personally, I think his game is just, it's not fun to watch, in my opinion. It's a little boring, but who am I to judge? He's the one that's getting 70 points, not me. The Lakers play against the Chicago Bulls tomorrow. Zach LaVine didn't play in his last game, so right now, if you're a Lakers fan, that's good news, simply because you need this win. If you are a Lakers fan, you're 22-23 right now. The recent loss coming from the Clippers, as I mentioned before. LaVine hasn't been playing, neither has LeBron, which is also something that you should be worrying about. Starting to look a little bit more like LeBron, might be taking a little more breaks now, seeing as All-Star break is coming up around the corner. Alex Caruso, a former Laker favorite, it's anyone's game at this point. With who's going to end up on top. So DeMar isn't really much of a reliable option as I thought he was on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm not entirely sure if I trust him to win this game for the Chicago Bulls. He doesn't do enough for the most part, in my opinion. Anthony Davis is still playing, so I'm sure he's going to have a pretty good game against the Bulls. The Wolves go up against Washington, which should be an easy win for them. However, given that they recently lost to the Hornets, I'll include this in the segment anyway. I already mentioned before how with the team they have and the length and these players and a lot of their methods of beating you, it makes them a great team to win it all. They have a great guard, great defense, good length, makes it difficult, makes shot contests a lot more apparent. They do, however, have an immaturity problem. The coach said this over their recent loss while Karl Anthony Towns was having his ridiculous 62-point game. They played immature. It was bad ball. This was a problem that Jimmy Butler had recently with the team. Hasn't really changed them yet. Obviously, one of their players was having a great game, so it makes sense that maybe they go a little stupid here and there, but still wasn't really wise. Wasn't something that they necessarily needed to do, and it resulted to them losing, which obviously, if you lose because of your own fault, that's much worse than losing because the other team was better than you. Losing is losing regardless, I understand that, but if you have the ability to impact that in a way and you just don't, that hurts you a lot more and it hurts your team much more, in my personal opinion. Some more matchups that we could talk about going in. Friday, the Phoenix Suns are going up against the Indiana Pacers. Again, assuming if Tyrese can play, I believe that is going to be a very high-scoring game, and the two sides are going to go blow for blow at each other in two completely different ways. Tyrese is going to have a very high-paced offense, while the Suns are most likely going to run an isolation-heavy offense, and I believe it's going to be a good show offensively. And assuming, again, if Tyrese plays, because there's also the possibility that he doesn't play, as he hasn't been playing in some of these games, but we'll see. I also like to take this time to mention that I'm using the Quinnipiac podcast room, so shout out to them for allowing me to use this. And with that shout out, I would like to go off to a break and go into the fourth segment where we talk about the head coach of the Blazers, Chauncey Billups, filing a protest challenging the results of the recent game and the loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I will also be going on and acknowledging the comments in the chat because there is a few of them, but I will be back after this short break. And we are back to the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm going to, before I get into the segment about the Blazers going on strike, I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge some of the comments that I see in the stream right now. Crucial PG said that he was waiting on Portland versus Houston. That's a very interesting game to be waiting on. I personally do not see the appeal on Portland going against Houston whatsoever. That's me. And like that game just doesn't sound interesting in my opinion. There's not really much players, like since Damian Lillard's not on Portland anymore, there's not really much players that I would want to watch on Portland. That rookie doesn't really impress me that much, and I'm also not a big fan. I mean, Sengun is a great player. I'll give it that. I don't mind watching Sengun play sometimes. He's a great player to watch. I'm not a big fan of Dylan Brooks, so I don't really watch a lot of his games. Crucial PG also mentioned in the chat, Rookie of the Year, in his opinion, should be Leaky Black from Charlotte. Obviously, Leaky Black is definitely not going to win Rookie of the Year. He's one of the least talked about rookies in the market right now. It's going to be Victor Wembanyama, 100%, without a doubt. No questions about that. And let's move on to the fourth segment where we talk about the Blazers going on strike after the results of losing the game against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, the Blazers, they recently played against them in a very close game where they were up by 1 point towards the very end, but a Portland player ended up getting called for a double dribble. Chauncey and company got very upset because they feel that the ref missed the call for the timeout. And because of this, it resulted in Chauncey getting a double technical, which then resulted in Oklahoma getting a free throw. Now, because of this free throw, it allowed Oklahoma to tie the game, which eventually put them in striking distance tie game, which allowed them to take a 2-point jumper for the win. J-Dub is the player that ended up hitting the game-winning shot. And the team plans, after this loss, after this egregious missed call, according to them, the team plans to file a protest with the league. This kind of shifts the talk away from Jalen Williams hitting the game winner. Shai once again drops 33 points in the win, despite all the talk behind this protest over the league. This does take away from Jalen Williams and his game winner, along with Shai. A lot of these protests have been taking away from a lot of these players having really big games. Like, for example, with the Pacers and what they did with Giannis Antetokounmpo and the game ball, that got more attention than Giannis actually having a great game and having a career game. That got more focus on and got more attention by the media than like the game ball and losing the game ball. It got more focus from media than the actual good game that Giannis had, and if he actually deserved the ball, which in my opinion, he definitely did if you look at the numbers. Now, the odds of them even getting their protest to have a worthy listening is almost zero. There's almost no point in doing this protest if you are the Portland Trail Blazers. You are a team that's in the bottom side of the Western Conference. No team has really protested like this after a game before. Most of the time in the games, the fans are the ones that are protesting over the team. So I haven't seen a team attempt this before, especially a team that's like fighting for a top pick in the draft. I don't really see a point in Portland doing this move as of right now, because it's like, why? There's no need for it. You're a bottom team in the Western Conference right now, and right now you're just causing drama and more distraction for the team. Focus on getting your team to get the wins rather than blaming your losses on outside dilemmas that you can't control. If teams start protesting in a lot of these games, I believe that this is a step in a bad direction, because if teams start protesting in games that already have happened, that's just going to bring delay in the season with unnecessary talk and unnecessary drama with games that already happen. It's like, what is a player, or what is a team, what is a referee, what is a crew expected to do to change the results of a game that was poorly officiated? It was like, it's not as simple as football, where in football you could replay the down right then and there, or just flat out change the results of the game because of the bad call from the down, if that makes sense. Like, we can take the Detroit versus the Dallas Cowboys game in the regular season as an example. The Lions ended up converting the down, and we saw them convert the down, but the down was called back. They could just reset that and give them the down, so that way they could win the game. That's how simple it is in football. But for basketball, where every possession counts, and every possession could be played differently, doing this protest at the end of the game is just silly, in my opinion, because imagine if this happens to, like, in the playoffs, and like you decide to just protest while you're in the middle of trying to win the series. It's like, you can't necessarily protest every single time. It's, again, I don't like to mention football, but football has done this a lot. The Bills, they recently protested the overtime rules, and they ended up getting those rules changed. Now, again, that's a little bit different, because they protested for after the game and for the next season. Doing something to change the results directly and to impact the season negatively for a team that essentially didn't do anything wrong is unfair. And I personally don't like where this is going, because if other teams decide to call if the other teams decide to go on strike like this, then it could just slow down the league. Like, imagine if the Lakers go on strike. Like, nobody is going to want to talk about that. Nobody's going to like that. That's going to be the talk for like a whole week, and nobody is going to like that. They're going to just put all the crying memes with LeBron, like, when he's crying, like he's making a big deal out of something that, like, is essentially nothing, which is what Portland is doing. And it especially doesn't help. Like, this is something the Lakers didn't even do this, and they've had several games where they could do this. They could go on strike, and where they could make these claims that, like, they should have won these games, but they ended up not winning these games. Like, for example, when they went up against the Timberwolves and LeBron allegedly took a 2-pointer instead of taking a 3-pointer, which in my opinion was definitely a 3-pointer, without a doubt a 3-pointer, but I digress. That game was it ended up being a Lakers loss simply because that wasn't a 3-pointer. So imagine if they went on strike then. Nobody would drop that. I'm pretty sure I would be talking about it now still if that would have happened. Nobody would have dropped that. But that's just my opinion on that sort of little segment where they go on strike. Once again, something that shouldn't really happen. I don't think that nothing is going to come out of it. It's just something that should be glossed over. And with that, we are out of time with this 4th segment. Thank you all for tuning in to this live stream of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Once again, I am your host, Nelson, and as always, I like to remind you guys before I go to please tip and donate. Makes the show a lot more interactive between myself, the host, you guys, the viewers. The link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, if you'd like to become a member, if you like the video, please don't forget to like. Please do not forget to subscribe. And as always, take care.